Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between green hills and a sparkling river, there lived a young woman named Elizabeth. Elizabeth was known for her kindness and her bright smile, but she often felt like something was missing in her life. The village was small, and everyone knew each other, but sometimes Elizabeth wished for adventure beyond the hills. Every morning, Elizabeth would wake up early to help her mother with chores. They would tend to their small garden, where they grew vegetables and flowers. Elizabeth loved the way the sun felt on her skin and how the flowers danced in the gentle breeze. But as beautiful as her village was, Elizabeth often gazed longingly at the mountains in the distance, dreaming of what lay beyond them. One afternoon, while she was walking by the river, Elizabeth met an old man sitting on a large rock. He had a long beard and wore a tattered cloak. Despite his appearance, there was a warmth in his eyes that made Elizabeth feel safe. "Hello, young lady," he said with a smile. "What brings you here on this fine day?" "I'm just thinking," Elizabeth replied, sitting down beside him. "I want to see the world beyond this village. I want to have adventures and learn new things." The old man nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, the call of adventure. It is a strong pull, isn't it? But let me tell you something. Sometimes the greatest stories are not the ones far away, but the ones hidden in plain sight." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked, intrigued. He leaned closer and began to tell her a story. Many years ago, in a village much like yours, there lived a woman named Isabella. She was known for her beauty and grace, but what most people did not know was that she possessed a special gift. She could understand the language of animals. Elizabeth's eyes widened. Really? How did she discover this gift? One day, while walking through the woods, Isabella heard a tiny voice. It was a little bird with a broken wing. Instead of being afraid, she listened to the bird's cries. To her surprise, she could understand it. The bird told her about its pain, and with great care, Isabella helped it heal. From that day on, she realized she could communicate with all animals. "What happened next?" Elizabeth asked, eager to know more. "The village was often troubled by wild animals that would come down from the mountains, causing havoc. The villagers were scared and wanted to drive them away. But Isabella spoke to the animals, understanding their needs and fears. She learned they were only looking for food and shelter because their own homes were destroyed." The old man continued. "Isabella told the villagers the truth, but they were angry. They thought she was foolish for talking to animals. However, she refused to give up. She organized a meeting between the villagers and the animals. It was a strange sight, but slowly, everyone began to understand each other." "What happened at the meeting?" Elizabeth asked, captivated. At first, there was tension. The villagers shouted at the animals, and the animals growled in response. But then Isabella stepped forward and spoke from her heart. She explained the animals' struggles, and she urged the villagers to find a solution together. After a long discussion, they agreed to create a safe space for the animals and plant more trees and plants to provide food. In return, the animals would keep their distance from the village. "That's amazing!" Elizabeth exclaimed. "So, Isabella changed everything just by listening?" "Exactly," the old man said, his eyes sparkling. "She changed the perspective of the villagers. Instead of seeing the animals as threats, they began to see them as part of their world, deserving of compassion and understanding." Elizabeth thought for a moment, then asked, "But what if Isabella had never spoken to the animals? What if she didn't know her gift?" The old man smiled. "That is a good question. Sometimes we don't realize our gifts or the impact we can have until we try to understand those around us." "Elizabeth, you have a kind heart. Perhaps there are stories in your village waiting to be discovered." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Elizabeth felt a fire ignite within her. Inspired by Isabella's tale, she stood up, thanked the old man, and hurried back home. She could feel a new purpose blooming in her heart. Over the next few days, Elizabeth took her time observing the villagers. She listened carefully to their stories and noticed the small things that often went unnoticed. She saw Mr. Thompson, the grumpy baker, who seemed unhappy all the time. She decided to visit him one afternoon. "Mr. Thompson, how are you today?" she asked, entering his bakery. "Oh, just fine," he muttered, not looking up from his work. "I was wondering if you'd like some help." "Baking can be a lot of work," Elizabeth offered. To her surprise, Mr. Thompson paused and looked at her with curiosity. "Help? You want to help me?" "Yes, I think it would be fun," Elizabeth replied, her smile wide. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. "All right then, let's see what you can do." As they baked together, Elizabeth discovered that Mr. Thompson had a passion for baking that went beyond making bread and pastries. He shared stories of his youth, his love for the art, and how he once dreamed of opening a bakery in a bustling city. Elizabeth listened intently, and soon the bakery was filled with laughter instead of silence. Days turned into weeks, and Elizabeth continued to connect with the villagers. She learned that Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly woman living alone at the edge of town, had once been a talented painter. But after losing her husband, she had stopped creating. Elizabeth encouraged her to pick up a brush again and helped her paint a beautiful mural in the village square. Through her kindness, Elizabeth discovered that every person had a story, a dream, or a hidden talent waiting to be shared. The villagers began to bond over their shared experiences, and the village became a warmer, more vibrant place. One day, as she was walking through the village, Elizabeth noticed something strange. The river, which was usually clear and sparkling, was starting to look murky. People were complaining about the smell, and there was talk about what could be done. Many were angry and pointed fingers, blaming each other for the pollution. Elizabeth remembered the story of Isabella and how she had sought to understand rather than blame. Inspired, she gathered a group of villagers together and suggested they hold a meeting. "We need to understand what's happening with the river," she said, standing in front of them. "Let's talk and listen to each other." Some villagers were skeptical, but Elizabeth's determination shone through. They gathered by the riverbank the next evening, and she encouraged everyone to share their thoughts. As they talked, they discovered that factories upstream were dumping waste into the river. The villagers listened as each person spoke about how they had noticed the changes over time. Instead of blaming each other, they decided to work together to confront the factories about their practices. With Elizabeth leading the way, the villagers created a petition, organized cleanup days, and even wrote letters to the factory owners. They united in their efforts, and soon their voices were heard.